I'm Jonathan Corpus Ong, and I'm Associate Professor in Global Digital Media here at UMass. Okay, so I didn't start actually with communication and media. I was more interested in ethics and morality, and I think media is one significant aspect of this. So how can we care and know about cultures and issues happening far away? So certainly journalists, and nowadays through social media we learn about issues happening in cultures far different from ours. So I was thinking about how can we live well together, and how can we better live in a society which is about complexity and multiculturalism, and media is at the heart of it. So I teach two classes currently. One is social media in everyday life, and here it foregrounds the perspective of audiences and users of social media. And so rather than just looking at the designers and platform owners, we want to understand the contemporary practices and emerging practices in our social media environment. So my students talk about Instagram, Finstagrams, and different kinds of vernaculars of social media. And I try to bring in a global perspective to this class as well. So trying to ask them to compare how some of these platforms are used differently by different communities around the world. Another class is Media Solidarities in the Age of Global Crisis. And this class is much more political and moral in its framing of some of these issues. So here we think about contemporary practices of journalism and crisis reporting in the media. We also consider here how technologies are used by affected people and communities who are marginalized. So including in the context of disasters, refugee camps, and what are the social practices with regard to using new technologies in these places. Yes, so I've done a lot of research with marginalized communities and how they use social media. And here, the focus is on how they use social media for healing and for community, for repairing their lives after rupture and after disaster. So one example would be my current research on refugee communities and how social media is important in some of these spaces of transience, including the refugee camps. So together with a colleague, Maria Ravisco, we're trying to develop the concept of conviviality. And here, what we mean by this is how do arts and entertainment media, how are they important for refugees to cope from this condition and try to establish a sense of security, safety, and healing, usually in a space which is considered to be very dull and hopeless. So that's one approach. In a previous project, I've done collaborative research with people looking at communication technologies after disaster in the Philippines. So we looked at Typhoon Haiyan as a case in which a lot of communication technologies, including mobile phones, SMS, and mapping technologies, new innovations in disaster response were implemented by humanitarian agencies, and also how affected people made use of some of these new media to give feedback to agencies, also for fundraising and trying to cope after disaster. So I firmly believe in immersing with communities and getting to know the perspectives and motivations of people, why they do the things that they do, and trying to understand that more deeply. And so I encourage my students to interview and go out to communities, talking to people, to different groups, and trying to compare and contrast what their motivations and uses are with social media. So part of that is interviewing older people, why they go onto social media, younger people, what the differences are across generations, also across social class, what might be more specific uses of social media for marginalized groups. Another example would be thinking about the ethics of emerging and obscure practices. And so, what are the ethics of coming up with a fake Instagram account, and what might motivate people to craft a different persona from who they are in their Facebook profile? And should they have a sense of responsibility for the things that they say in these platforms? So my students are very active in coming up with projects with communities that they choose to interview. They do about 4 to 6 interviews and then write a paper as a group if they choose to. I encourage my students to be empathetic and to understand and get to know the communities that they speak about. And rather than to immediately judge and offer criticism, I think students tend to mistake being critical with offering a lot of criticisms on social media or digital media, and also the people who use them. And so I encourage students to listen and empathize, get to know why people do the things that they do, compare and contrast their situation together with other people. And I think it's through that very open-minded and approach to listening to people, and I think that they could be better communicators.